Hello, this is Jan Moray, and welcome to this week's edition of Greet the Week. And I have with us our co-host, Mona Duncan, who's going to be leading the discussion today. And we have several other guests who have joined us, and I appreciate all the people who join us live. It's always exciting to see familiar faces joining in, and we appreciate you who are watching us on the recording. And so today's topic is changing perspective. And when we originally started Greet the Week, this was Mona's idea. You know, we wanted to transform Mondays from duty to delight. You know, because everybody dreads Mondays, and we don't want to go to work. We have a hard time getting out of bed, and so it's like, well, let's figure out a way to make Mondays better. And then Mona says, well, we're going to transform it from duty to delight. But what's wrong with duty? So Mona, what is wrong with duty?
Well, actually, it's the attitude that we see duty. It's what can make it wrong. You know, having a duty, having a job to do, having a responsibility is an honorable thing. But whenever we get to the point that no one else, you know, can't, that it has to be just exactly my way, or if we think we're doing the best we can and maybe someone isn't appreciating it, or, you know, then we just become upset and all that kind of stuff. So I thought we would look a little bit today at duty and being responsible and perception. So I suggest that our perception, you know, we all know what our perception is. It's the way we see something, and the way we see it, we have a tendency to hold on to it. It becomes enduring, but it's not always endearing because we see things that are, you know, not always so good. And a perception is partial information, because there's no way we can see all of the nuances that are attached with whatever we're looking at, or whatever we're seeing, whatever we may be judging, whatever we may be. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the judgment. It's just that because we're all, you know, we need to have a righteous judgment. But if we begin to judge something according to thinking that we know all the ins and outs and what's needed and what's required and all that, that's whenever we bring some sorrow on our own selves.
Right. Gary, that's something that you're trying to show. Can you talk? Yeah. Otherwise, you're not going to show up on the recording.
On exactly this subject of duties, I have a plaque on my wall. I don't know if you can read it or not, but I'll read it for you. It's a quote from Goethe. Okay. And it says, "It is not doing the things we like to do, but liking the things we have to do that makes life blessed." Isn't that exactly what Mona's talking about?
Exactly.
It is.
Exactly. And we even change our mind. You know, if there's something that I'm asked to do, or it is a duty to do, a requirement of, and I may not be all gung-ho for it, I'm going to change my mind to at least I'll enjoy this. I choose to. It goes back to the choices that we make.
If you like it, then it takes away the duty part of it, and it becomes a lot more fun.
Right. We were talking last week, whenever we were talking, I don't remember who I quoted from, that he said, I never lose. And if I'm not winning, then I decide that at least I'll participate, but I never lose. And it's basically the same thing. If you don't like it, decide that you do like it. Decide that there's something there that you can learn from.
Well, for me, it's like the duty that you have to do is I am somebody who has a very strong power need, where I like to have feel a sense of accomplishment and to do things. And so for the things that I have to do, I turn it around because I know I'm going to feel good about it when I get it done. I will feel accomplished because I have completed it. So that's the way I look at the things that I have to do, instead of saying, oh no, I got to cook again tonight. Because, you know, I'm very lucky because my husband's very appreciative of my efforts to cook. And so he always tells me, you know, how wonderful it is. And and I feel accomplished. I feel like I've done something. So it takes the drudgery out of chopping all those vegetables.
And not only that, to change it into something that I like to do and to look for some reasons that it is an accomplishment. But, just like movement or exercising, I like to get up and do it first thing in the morning because then it's over with and I don't have that dread the rest of the day. So it's the planning of, and I always plan on Sunday evenings. I plan my whole week. Not that it follows it to the exactness, but it has more, there's more leeway there. There's more, you can, fill things in, and it's not that anxiety of pressure. So I have a little chart here. Can you see this okay? Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to explain it to you. So this is our job that we need to do, okay? Mm-hmm. And it's up here high in the sky, and we're looking up to it, and it involves us, definitely, but everything, someone else is involved in everything we do, if we're all alone. Well, anyway, so what happens is all too often, so we see us and the job that we need to do, but, we kind of box us in, and we kind of box them in, and we kind of box the job in because we have all these descriptions and so forth. And boy, with all this, it's going to really bring joy to us. But here we are. Do you see us? This is us, because we are holding the world on our shoulders. That's right there, and we're just so depressed and bent over and everything else. And the thing of it is because we often lose sight of what the job is. And sometimes we lose sight of how much we are accomplishing that job because these others that are to be a part of it or will benefit from it, they may not be smiling at us.
Right. So, they might not appreciate all the work you're putting into it.
Right. Maybe not agreeing, all this kind of stuff. And so what do? Well, we want to turn this down. We want to bring it down here. And the job, the duty, the responsibility, the principles of a human life, of working together at home as well as in the community and so forth, and having neighbors and all that. So we come down here and we kind of begin to look at and know what our job description is, or what kind of a personality we have, and all that kind of stuff. And so we begin to put our roots down in what kind of a person, we begin to put our roots down. We could come down here and equate this with our basic needs of taking care of us, of getting enough sleep, of those power needs, whatever it is we need to do to accomplish, to sign up for, to be a part of, to get that accomplishment need or that freedom need, that fun need. It's all of these needs, and we put our roots down in it, okay? We put our roots down. And I've been doing a lot of yard work, and I'm going to go do more this afternoon when we finish here. But what happens is, whenever you put those roots down, you begin to soak up the nutrients from the soil. So as we take care of our basic needs, we become full of it. Have you ever been full of it?
Never.
I want us to look at being full of it in a positive way, okay? Mm-hmm. Then we get full of it because there's not all that discrepancy in there. So when the full of it, what happens is we spring a leak. And we begin to, kind of spout it over, and it flows over into our neighbors and into our co-workers and into our family members, children, and elsewise. And so over here, because I love the, one of the rules of 3 is that 3 can only be divided by itself. And so 3, if we take all the people in that's on this, that's, part of our job of life, living in planet Earth, we have over here the Mr. and Mrs. Grouches, and over here we have the Mr. and Mrs. Nices. And we're going to encounter all of them. And matter of fact, sometimes we may slide over into being a grouch.
Yeah.
Or we may slide over into being the nice. But the more we can stay centered and realizing that, who we are responsible for, and our thoughts and so forth, and that is us, then you know what? Out of the overflow, we can be a blessing to them. And so we're doing the best we can. And if we're not doing the best we can, we've got to get honest with ourselves. because that goes back to our perception and our thoughts. And so I've used this before, and I might could take this off. But anyway, our thoughts, the little graphic that I could is, here's our thoughts. We're going to do 3 things. Here's our thoughts. And our thoughts all too often condemn us.
Mm-hmm. They can, most definitely.
Yeah. And whenever we allow our thoughts to condemn us, what happens is we allow it to weaken us.
Mm-hmm.
But we can use those thoughts to prove ourselves wrong. That I made an error, but you know what? I bet I can correct it.
Right.
If not, I can take my punishment or my whatever. Yeah. I can take the consequences of it, but let it be a natural one, not a imposed
forced one. Right. Right. Yeah, well, I mean, that goes back to things we talked about before, where we're going to make mistakes in life. We can't go through life flawlessly. Things are going to happen, and we just learn how to deal with the things that didn't go so well, and keep moving forward. Learn from it and keep going.
Right.
And not beat yourself up about it.
Yes. And on that little blurb about, our topic for today, I put that we would kind of delve into the duality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that in the one is the whole. I mean, we are a combination, every one of us, are good, bad, positive, negative, accomplishments, not so much accomplishments. We are all a part of that. And over this whole weekend, after I wrote that down about the duality, I've been thinking more about it. And I mean, I've had opportunity to be with a lot of gatherings this past week. And I'm thinking, you know what? Everyone that's in this room, everyone that's on this call, we're all a part of the whole of this particular session. And when I spoke the other day, you know what? I was a part of that whole. I was a part of it. And they were a part of it, everyone that was there. And in having a family gathering yesterday of married ends as well as friends that chose to come in, I was a part of the whole, but every one of them there was a part of the whole. And there was some things, in discussions and so forth that was agreed with and disagreed with. But we're all a part of that whole. But how are we going to work with it to help it run more smoothly? So there is a book. It's called The Undoing Project. It was written by Michael Lewis, and it is about 2 Israeli psychologists that would work with students and colleges and so forth, and they would go in and they would ask everyone in the class would ask them questions, and they would help them to look at something like maybe a plane crash or a car wreck that they had been involved in, or they knew of something, or it was something in the news, and would ask them, here's the end result of it, but if you were a part of that, what could you have done previously that could have put off a negative result?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was a broken relationship. What was it that, as you look back, Kierkegaard said we live life forward and understand it backward. So as you're looking at it here, this is the negative result, and you look back on what did happen. If, and it's a big if, and it's, kind of a play like, but if you could go back and make some corrective changes then, what would you have done? And, you may think, well, that sounds like, well, it sounds unreasonable because we can't go back, and we can't. But back to perception, the way we begin to perceive something, it has a tendency to endure. And so if it is not bringing our life to be much more effective and much more pleasant and much more joyful, we need to kind of look back and see where has it become enduring rather than endearing.
Yeah. No, I like it that you said that the perception is the one that keeps on going, because that is so true, because we all look at the same, we can all look at the same incident and have a different idea of what that meant, what we got out of it. And so even though you do something that you're not so happy about, if you change your perception about it, that could help you to deal with it, and so it doesn't keep troubling you. It's not holding you back,
and you don't keep reenacting it.
Right.
In a different mode, in a different method, but still it's enacting the same error.
Yeah.
Again and again. And so, as we can accept the fact, which it is a fact, it's been a fact that I see as a repeatable fact, is that life brings both troubles and joys.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
It's going to bring those troubles. We have to accept that. Life is going to bring us trouble. It's going to bring us a lot of joy. But if you keep letting all those troubles outweigh the joy that you're getting, what are you doing?
Right. So we begin to accept the responsibility on my part. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have some regrets, but it's moving past it rather than burdening it and carrying it with us, except we use it with us as an example of what not to do. And as we accept responsibility for our part, then we can become emotionally undone. And I mean that, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Well, the thing of it is, just like a fish does not know that he is living in water, mm-hmm. So too we all too often do not realize that we're unaware of our mental processes and how that what we think about becomes what we do, what we feel. And as we can begin to realize that, then we can undo those things emotionally, even though we can't go back and erase the fact that the house flooded. Even though we can't go back and erase those things. It is looking at the fact that our perception toward them, that it was terrible, it was horrible, it can't be repaired. Then we can be set free emotionally. That it can become something that is buoyancy, it buoys us up rather than keeping us down. Yeah. So, accepting responsibility, and I like to look at responsibility, spell it out, and then I will mark able. I have the ability to how I will respond.
Yeah.
And that's a...
Yeah, responsibility is another one of those bad words like duty. that people, when they first hear it, they have a negative connotation in their mind, because who wants to be responsible? A lot of times we think of responsibility, then it's my fault and I'm going to be the one who has to pay. But responsibility is a very powerful thing if you take responsibility for your own life. I mean, that comes next to empowerment. You are empowering yourself by taking that responsibility. And so we need to create a positive light on that word responsibility, as well as on the word duty, that we are able to respond in a different way, in a way that's going to make it better for us.
Yeah. And that the more knowledge we have, the more information we receive, it gives us an increase in a predictable outcome that would be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And it is being aware of that and being open to receiving information, whether it's from someone or from just whatever, just being open to receiving more information. Because, there are no communication gaps. Meaning that if there's something we don't understand, we'll fill in the blanks.
Right.
And especially if we are with that duty, or my job or whatever, and that drudgery, because I thought this is what they wanted. I thought this, rather than asking, could you explain to me what I've not understood? Or, how have I missed? Or we were doing something that we thought was going to make them happy, or we thought was going to do this, and we thought was going to do that. And it's realizing that, well, we're all storytellers, and maybe we have just stuck stuff in there that was not a part of the equation.
Yeah.
Because it
Some
was
of us are more creative than others too. We're more creative in our rendition than what actually happened, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And we think what we know what everybody else was thinking and why they were doing the things that they did. And so we create all that background that goes with it when none of it may be true at all.
Yeah. And so when we do not accept responsibility for our part in the error, in the misconception, in the whatever, then it leads to guilt or depression or drudgery. Where we accept the responsibility for our part, then we become emotionally buoyant again. Doesn't mean that we don't regret it. Doesn't mean that there's not some mending to be done. But then we are released from the effects of our error. And you may have to kind of think about that.
Yeah. So say a little bit more about that.
Okay. When we can take the responsibility for our part of the error, then whatever happens can be more organic rather than imposed. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not to say that you won't be fired. Now, that's not to say that someone won't, that you won't be wounded. But as we can begin to be more in touch with our own thoughts and how we receive the thoughts that others are giving us, whether we agree or disagree, the more we can be protected mentally, emotionally, physically, like a policeman wearing a bulletproof jacket. You may still be shot, and it may even break a bone or deeply bruise, but the likelihood of surviving it will be much more in your effect. So as we can begin to take any information seriously without taking it personally, without taking it and rubbing it into a wound or into the salt, Yeah. And the better we can be, and the sooner. Not only we will not take on the guilt of having to. Well, we'll realize back to the Sneetches. You've heard me do the Sneetches before.
Right. Yes, the Dr. Seuss and the Sneetches.
The Sneetches meet, and they come to a decision that I'm not moving. But all you have to do is just have one little step to the side, and then decide that. So then you are not responsible for the effects of the other person. If you just simply step aside and either let them stay stuck or move on past, because we cannot control anyone else.
No.
And but here's another thing in taking on that responsibility down here, that we're making it our cornerstone, we're making it our foundation, is that one of the things that we have down here in this, and part of the 5 our basic needs, is to continue to hold that person in high regard. That wrong, hold them in high regard. And sometimes it's just even telling yourself, you know what, I didn't like that at all, and this is really hard, that I choose to.
Right. I have to fake it for a little while, and hopefully this feeling will go away.
Exactly. Fake it till you make it. And Zig Ziglar that said that. But one of the psychologists in the Undoing Project, he reminds me a whole lot of Dr. Glasser and because they were just looking with thoughts and how people thought and how they would rethink. And in the rethinking, you can, part of the undoing. Anyway, he said, Amos Tversky said, I find a sense of movement and discovering when I find a flaw in my thinking. And I do too. Oh, well, maybe I did misunderstand. And sometimes even just giving a possibility to, well, maybe that is. We had a really deep discussion.
To that way of thinking and looking at it a different way.
Right, right, right. We had a rather deep discussion with the young and the old both yesterday with a meal gathering, and that was one had been watching some videos about those that believe in the flat that are still on the flat Earth
Oh,
beliefs. And they were going, well, how could somebody believe that? How could somebody believe that? But the thing of it is, if they do, they do.
right.
I mean, that's part of our free will. We can think whatever we want to think. We can believe whatever we want to believe.
And the harder you try to make somebody change their mind, the more they're going to stick with that thing that they're believing.
Right, right, right. And
even
it's
if
just
they finally realize that it's not true, they're going to stay with it for a while until they just can't hold on to it any longer.
right, right. Sometimes because we don't want to be humiliated. But as we can humble ourselves and realize I may be wrong, then that humiliation just, it just scoots off. Because even if you are wrong, it's like, oh, yeah, I don't know why I didn't see that, but I didn't. But now I am.
Yeah.
So,
and just to own up to it that you were seeing it wrong, and that, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. I understand it now. Just instead of acting like, oh no, I always thought that way, or not even mentioning it, just owning up to it really says a lot. It helps people to think better of you. Admitting those mistakes is a positive thing.
right.
You look weaker. It brings you stronger in other people's eyes.
Yeah. And, this is just one of my beliefs, but I believe that people are not deliberately irrational.
Right.
Although I've challenged that.
That's right.
There are some people in my life I've challenged that belief. And are you sure that they're not deliberately irrational? But sometimes it's just a little bitty seeing. I had my eyes checked not fairly recently, and they would put these things up to you, and they would switch this one. Well, which is better, this one or this one? Oh, what about this one? And they all look the same. I really couldn't tell. So you're going too fast. I got to look at this a little longer to see which one is the best. And that's the same thing with our perception, because we're very, very flexible. But the more we can be flexible, say, well, wait a minute, let me look at this a little different way. Because back to the fact that in the whole is everything. Part of that whole is the fact that there are lies. There are lies.
Yeah.
There are untruths. There are some very negative things in this world. There's snakes. There's roaches.
Right.
I hope I can keep them out of my house. But
especially down here in South Texas, right? Central Texas, right?
Yes.
Oh.
So it was basically, and then get some input from others. I was looking at the fact that having a firm foundation, challenging our own thoughts, so that we can find that whenever we have an error in our thinking, that we can feel that movement, we can feel that limberness, we can feel that buoyancy. That all right.
Yeah.
I saw a poster one day that said that angels fly because they don't take themselves seriously. And I don't know about that. I mean, I may have called a few of my grandkids angels, but I don't know that I've ever met an angel. Yeah. But so we have some comments from those of you that have joined us today.
Yeah, I have an observation.
Okay.
Years ago, I came across, and I'm not sure whether it was Glasser or someplace, but it's that throughout life, we go through 4 steps. All day long, we're going through 4 steps, all of us, all human beings. The first is perception. You see something, whatever it is. The second and most important is interpretation. Different people will interpret the same thing differently.
Yeah.
I can give you many examples, but I'm going to keep going. The third step is to decide what to do about it. And the fourth step is acting. So there's perception. You see something, you interpret it, you decide whether it requires any action or not, and then you act or you don't act, which is a form of acting.
Right.
But those are the 4 steps that we go through throughout life. I'm looking at you, and I'm perceiving you, and I'm interpreting what you say as true or not. And then I'm deciding, well, do I go along with that or not? And I almost always do. And then I act and I accept it or I don't accept it. That's just one example, but there's billions of examples throughout life. But those are the 4 steps that we all go throughout life, whether we're aware of it or not. And the second step of interpretation is by far the most important one, because that separates how different people act about different. They all see the same thing, and then they act differently, or they interpret it differently.
Well, not necessarily don't see the same thing, because you're looking at it through your lens of life.
Well, yes, but you're talking about the interpretation is where the lens through life comes in.
Sure.
I mean, you and I could look at a dog. We both see the same dog, and we might interpret it quite differently. One of us may love dogs, and one of us may be fearful of dogs. But it's that interpretation. It's the lens. Yes, it's the lens that we see it through. I'm calling it an interpretation. You're calling it a lens. It's the same thing, but we're both seeing the same dog.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
that's what I had to say about it.
Yeah, that's nice, Jerry. Thanks. I like those.
I was thinking, Mona, what Jerry just said, it's wonderful, because if beauty has to be, beauty has to be in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
I still say to my husband, I still see you with hair, darling.
So, and in the same way, so does ugly have to be in the eye of the beholder. Whether it's ugly or whether it's evil, or it's in the.
Sure, that's the interpretation, though.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with everything we've experienced from the womb on.
Yeah, I just thought of 2 or 3 things. I like the way when you talked about the perceived world or perception. I mean, we don't get a lobotomy, I mean, the memory is there. So I always say to people, we don't have a lobotomy here. You still remember, even if you say, oh, I took my divorced husband out of my quality world. Well, yeah, maybe it's faded, but it's there somewhere. It's still in your perceived world. And also, the brain doesn't like vacuums. So that's why witnesses aren't all that.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I was going with the storytelling. We'll fill in that vacuum ourselves.
I think it's called confabulation, but they fill in the brain fills in the blanks. And then I'm thinking of when you talked about, we too had family, younger and older people here yesterday for dinner. And the millennials see things quite differently. And I was thinking of many of them addicted to their emotions, because I'm thinking of the old movie, What the Bleep Do We Know?
Right.
So I think then choice theory is really needed so much throughout the world, because we can help them. If that I always talk about the inflated wheel being feeling or emotion, it doesn't help in making decisions.
It keeps it all off balance.
Spinning out of balance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're over our time for the broadcast today, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So thanks to everybody, but we will stay on to have more discussion if you'd like. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week.